You can't just stand there, sweetheart. This isn't a library. This is the grinder. Out here, silence gets you killed. Now, pick up your gear and move, or get the hell off my island. The laughter from the other trainees was sharp and nervous, like stones skipping across a frozen pond. It was the kind of laughter that sought to align itself with power, a desperate shield against the instructor's biting scorn. Petty Officer Rourke, a man whose neck was as thick as his prejudice, stood with his hands on his hips, his jaw set in a mask of theatrical contempt. He stared down at the woman before him, a figure so unassuming she seemed to blend into the gray mist rolling off the Pacific. Her name was Anya Sharma, and she had said nothing. She simply stood, her posture perfectly balanced, her eyes scanning the churning, slate-colored waves, her expression as unreadable as the weather-worn granite cliffs behind her. There was no defiance in her stillness, no fear, no anger. There was only a profound and unnerving calm, a quiet economy of motion that Rourke mistook for hesitation, for weakness. He saw a small frame, a woman in a world of men, a quiet mouse where he expected a wolf. His world was one of loud declarations, of shouted orders and guttural affirmations, and her silence was a language he did not understand. It felt like an insult to the noisy, brutalist architecture of his authority. But across the training ground, observing from the covered porch of the command hut, Captain Miller saw something else entirely. He saw not hesitation, but assessment. He saw a stance that wasn't passive but rooted, a grip on her rifle that was practiced and familiar, a deep and patient connection between the operator and her tools. He saw the subtle shift of her weight as she compensated for a gust of wind, an unconscious act of environmental awareness that spoke of thousands of hours spent in places far harsher than this wind-swept training island. While Rourke saw a liability, the captain saw a finely calibrated instrument, and a cold knot of apprehension tightened in his gut. He knew that nature and men like Rourke had one thing in common. They both loved to test things until they broke. He just wasn't sure Rourke understood what he was trying to break. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to scream its name to be heard, type competence below. Petty Officer Rourke, emboldened by the sycophantic laughter, took a step closer to Anya, invading her personal space. He gestured expansively at the assembled group of hardened naval candidates, all of whom were watching the drama with a mixture of morbid curiosity and relief that they weren't the target. Look around, Sharma. See these men? They've been running since 0400. They've been in that freezing water. They've been pushing logs and carrying boats. They are earning their place here with sweat and noise. What have you done? You've observed. You've been methodical. This isn't a damn science project. He jabbed a finger toward the most desolate point on the small island, a narrow spit of land known as the Needle that jutted out into the turbulent channel, fully exposed to the elements. I've got a special assignment for you. Weather watch. You're going to go out to the Needle, and you're going to stay there until I relieve you. You could be as quiet as you want out there. Maybe the ocean will teach you how to make some noise. Maybe you'll learn that in the real world, you can't just think your way out of a problem. Sometimes you have to scream at it. It was a punishment disguised as a duty, a clear act of banishment. The forecast had been worsening all morning, a low-pressure system spinning up from the south faster than predicted. Sending anyone to the Needle was a calculated risk, but sending a candidate he perceived as the weakest was a statement. He was culling the herd. Anya Sharma's response was, as always, infuriatingly simple. Understood, petty officer, there was no plea, no argument, no flicker of fear. She simply turned, her movements fluid and efficient. She checked the seals on her dry bag, cinched the straps of her pack in a series of practiced, precise motions, and gave her rifle a quick systems check. The metallic click of the bolt carrier group sliding home was clean and sharp, a single, definitive note in the rising symphony of the wind. The other candidates watched her go, a lone figure walking toward the storm, her silhouette shrinking against the vast, angry backdrop of the sea and sky. Rourke grunted, satisfied. He had asserted his dominance, made his point. He turned back to the remaining men. All right, ladies, the lesson for today is this. We are a team. We are a chain. And a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We leave the weak behind so the strong can move faster. Now, let's go get wet. He led them on a punishing run toward the opposite side of the island, into the relative shelter of a small cove, leaving Anya to her solitary vigil, a sacrifice to his own ego. The storm did not arrive. It detonated. The sky, which had been a bruised purple, turned a malevolent shade of charcoal black in a matter of minutes. The wind stopped gusting and began to scream, a solid, high-pitched shriek that tore at the very fabric of the air. Rain didn't fall. It flew horizontally, driven with the force of fire hoses, each drop a stinging needle against exposed skin. The ocean, once merely choppy, became a chaotic maelstrom of mountainous waves that crashed against the cliffs with the percussive force of artillery shells. On the sheltered side of the island, Rourke and his team were fighting for their lives. Their inflatable boat, which they had been training with, was torn from its moorings and shredded against the rocks in seconds. Their primary radio, soaked by a rogue wave, sputtered and died, its silence more terrifying than the storm's roar. They huddled behind a rock outcropping, soaked to the bone, the cold seeping into their bodies, stealing their strength and their resolve. Panic began to set in, a cold and creeping dread. Shouts became meaningless, lost in the gale. Rourke's loud, confident voice was now just a thin, desperate sound, swallowed by the immense power of the tempest. He had led his strong lynx into a trap. Meanwhile, on the Needle, the most exposed and dangerous place on the island, Anya Sharma was working. She was not huddled. She was braced. Wedged into a narrow crevice between two massive granite boulders that she had identified hours earlier, she was shielded from the direct onslaught of the wind. She had used the time Rourke had given her not for self-pity, but for preparation. She had reinforced her shelter with loose rocks, creating a small but effective windbreak. She had laid out her essential equipment inside her waterproof pack in order of priority. Her movements were calm, deliberate, a stark contrast to the violent chaos outside her tiny sanctuary. The storm was not her enemy. It was a problem set, a complex series of variables to be analyzed and overcome. While Rourke's team felt the terror of being abandoned by technology and battered by nature, Anya was in her element. Her mind was a quiet, orderly space running through protocols and contingency plans. She felt the drop in barometric pressure not as a threat, but as data. She noted the shift in wind direction, the frequency of the lightning strikes, the period of the waves. She was not surviving the storm. She was dissecting it. The small, battery-powered emergency beacon she carried was useless, its signal too weak to cut through the electromagnetic interference generated by the lightning. A lesser individual would have given in to despair. For Anya, it was merely the first option being eliminated from the decision tree. She unspooled a length of copper wire from a small repair kit in her pack. With practiced hands, she stripped the insulation with her knife. She then dismantled a small, hand-cranked emergency flashlight, carefully extracting the small generator and its internal capacitor. It was a long shot, a desperate piece of battlefield engineering she had learned in a place where conventional tools were a luxury. Her hands, though cold, were impossibly steady as she worked, her fingers performing the delicate task of soldering wires together using a chemical heat pack and a bit of flux. She needed a better antenna, something to focus what little power she could generate. She found it in the form of a long, thin piece of driftwood, smoothed and hardened by the sea. She carefully wrapped the copper wire in a tight coil around it, calculating the length and spacing to match a specific emergency frequency. She was building a rudimentary Yagi antenna, a directional antenna that could punch a signal through the storm if she could just aim it correctly. She knew the main naval base was to the northeast. Bracing herself against the howling wind, she held the makeshift antenna, a fragile-looking thing of wood and wire, and began to crank the generator. It was exhausting work. Her muscles burned, but her rhythm was steady. Crank, pause, listen. Crank, pause, listen. Nothing but static. Then, a faint crackle. A ghost of a voice. She fine-tuned the antenna's direction by millimeters. Her entire consciousness focused on that fragile, electronic thread. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise, clear for a fraction of a second. Any station. This is Sea Serpent 1. Operating in Quadrant 4. Report, it was a SEAL team caught in the same storm, on a separate training mission nearby. Anya didn't hesitate. She keyed the small transmitter she had wired into her system. Her voice was the epitome of calm, a stark contrast to the screaming wind. Sea Serpent 1, this is Valkyrie. I am on San Clemente, grid 3275 north, 11858 west. I have 16 souls, non-hostile, requiring immediate extraction. Weather is untenable. I can provide terminal guidance. How copy? There was a pause, then the voice, sharp with surprise and professionalism. Solid copy, Valkyrie. We read you 5 by 5. Did you say terminal guidance? Who is this? Anya took a breath, the freezing air burning her lungs. This is Valkyrie. I'm the on-scene commander. Let's get to work. In the cove, Rourke and his men saw a light. A searchlight from a helicopter cutting through the deluge. It was impossible. No pilot could fly in this. But the light was steady, descending. As it neared, they saw the impossible machine. A Black Hawk, its rotors beating against the storm with terrifying power. It wasn't just landing, it was being guided, its every move precise and deliberate. When the door slid open, a team of Navy SEALs, clad in black and bristling with weapons, rappelled to the ground. Their leader moved toward Rourke's huddled, shivering group. But he didn't address the petty officer. His eyes scanned the area until he found what he was looking for. He walked over to the crevice where Anya Sharma was calmly coiling her wires. He didn't shout. He spoke with a quiet, profound respect that cut through the storm's roar. Valkyrie, Sea Serpent 1, we're on station. You brought us through hell. Rourke could only stare, his mind refusing to process the scene. The woman he had abandoned, the quiet librarian, was now commanding an entire SEAL team in the heart of a hurricane. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean and brutally rearranged. The sky was a pale, fragile blue, and the ocean, though still swollen and angry, had lost its murderous rage. A larger rescue force arrived from the mainland, led by a graying, formidable figure in a crisp, dry uniform. Captain Miller stepped off the lead landing craft, his face a mask of grim efficiency. His eyes swept over the scene of devastation, the wrecked equipment, the exhausted, shivering trainees huddled in thermal blankets, the silent, imposing figures of the SEAL team conducting a final sweep of the area. And then he saw Petty Officer Rourke, standing apart from his men, his face pale with a mixture of exhaustion, confusion, and a dawning, terrible shame. But Captain Miller's attention wasn't on Rourke. His gaze fixed on the small group standing near the makeshift command post that had been established around Anya's rock crevice. The SEAL team leader was speaking to her, not as a rescued civilian, but as a fellow professional, pointing to a chart, nodding as she spoke in low, technical tones. Miller walked directly toward them, his boots crunching on the wet sand. He ignored Rourke completely, bypassing him as if he were a piece of driftwood. The SEAL leader saw him approaching and immediately snapped to attention, saluting sharply. Captain Miller returned the salute with a curt nod, but his eyes were on Anya. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze taking in the improvised antenna, the jury-rigged generator, the calm, centered professional who looked as if she had just completed a routine exercise. The rest of the trainees, Rourke included, watched in stunned silence. They expected the captain to commend the SEALs, to check on the welfare of the rescued men, perhaps to reprimand Anya for being separated from her unit. What happened next shattered every assumption they had ever made. Captain Miller drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his hand to his brow in a slow, formal salute. It was not the casual salute one gives a subordinate. It was a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a senior officer reserves for a Medal of Honor recipient or a visiting dignitary. And it was directed at Anya Sharma. Master Sergeant, he said, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet morning air. On behalf of the United States Navy, thank you. You saved my men. Rourke's jaw literally dropped. Master Sergeant? The term hung in the air, electric and incomprehensible. He was a petty officer second class. A master sergeant in the Air Force was an E7, a senior non-commissioned officer, a leader of men with years, often decades of experience. It was a rank that commanded immediate and unquestioning respect. The woman he had berated, mocked, and abandoned held a rank equivalent to a Navy chief petty officer, and by the captain's tone, she was far more than that. The SEAL leader, sensing the confusion, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, I think you should see her file." Captain Miller gave a thin, grim smile. "I don't need to see it, Commander. I've been following her career for 5 years. But for the benefit of those who operate on assumptions, please enlighten them." The SEAL commander pulled a ruggedized tablet from his vest and tapped the screen. He turned it so the assembled trainees, and especially Rourke, could see. Anya Sharma's face appeared on the screen, a formal portrait, and below it, the text scrolled, a litany of achievements that defied belief. Name, Sharma Anya. Rank, Master Sergeant. Service, United States Air Force. Specialty, Combat Controller, Special Tactics Squadron. The commander's voice was flat, letting the words land with their own devastating weight. Awards, Air Force Cross, Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. He paused, letting the significance of those medals sink in. The Air Force Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor. Qualifications, Master Parachutist, Halo and HAHO qualified. Combat Diver, Air Traffic Control Specialist, Joint Terminal Attack Controller. He looked up from the screen and directly at Rourke. Master Sergeant Sharma has over 2,000 hours of combat experience. She has coordinated and controlled more than 300 close air support missions in active combat zones. The last time she was in a storm like this, she was directing fire from an AC-130 gunship to save an entire Green Beret ODA from being overrun in a valley in Afghanistan. She's not a trainee. She is here as part of the SOCOM Inter-Service Skills Exchange Program. She is here to observe our training methods and, apparently, to teach us a thing or two about what a true operator looks like. Captain Miller stepped forward again, his voice dropping to a low, cold fury that was far more terrifying than Rourke's shouting had ever been. Petty Officer Rourke, you saw a quiet woman and assumed she was weak. You saw methodical preparation and called it hesitation. You abandoned the single most qualified person on this island in a storm because her competence didn't look the way you expected it to. You didn't just fail her. You failed your men, you failed this command, and you failed the very ethos we stand for. Her silence wasn't fear. It was the calm of a professional who has been to hell and back so many times, she knows its precise temperature. You are relieved of duty. Get on that boat. The story of the storm on San Clemente became a legend before the sun had fully set that day. It traveled back to the mainland, not on official reports, but on the hushed, awestruck whispers of the rescued trainees and the quiet, professional nods of the SEALs. In the barracks, it was called the Valkyrie Tempest. In the mess halls, they told the tale of how Petty Officer Rourke, the loudest man on the base, was saved by the quietest woman he'd ever met. The details became mythologized, as they always do. Some said she had built the radio from scratch using nothing but seawater and a paperclip. Others swore she had stared down a rogue wave and commanded it to part. But the core of the story, the undeniable truth, was more powerful than any embellishment. A quiet professional, underestimated and discarded, had single-handedly saved 16 men through sheer, unadulterated competence. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. Rourke was not just relieved of duty. He was formally reprimanded and reassigned to a logistics desk, a quiet purgatory for an instructor who prided himself on being at the tip of the spear. The public humiliation was immense, but it was nothing compared to the private one. The incident forced him into a brutal and necessary period of self-reflection. The foundations of his worldview, that strength was loud, that leadership was aggressive, that difference was weakness, had been pulverized into dust. He was a man adrift, stripped of the arrogant certainty that had defined him. He had been so wrong, so catastrophically wrong, that it called into question every judgment he had ever made. The legend of Anya Sharma became a corrective lens for the entire training command, forcing a reevaluation of deeply ingrained cultural biases. Cadre began to look at their candidates differently, searching not just for brute strength and loud motivation, but for the quiet signs of methodical thinking, for the calm problem solvers, for the ones who observed more than they spoke. The incident exposed a critical flaw in their assessment protocols. They were selecting for a specific personality type, potentially weeding out individuals whose quiet competence was exactly what was needed when everything went wrong. A week later, Rourke found Anya in the base's technical library, the one place he had once mockingly accused her of belonging. She was seated at a table, meticulously cleaning the delicate components of a satellite radio, her movements as precise and unhurried as ever. He stood awkwardly for a moment, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, painful humility. "Master Sergeant," he began, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't look up immediately, continuing to wipe down a circuit board with a soft cloth. She simply said, "Rourke." He flinched at the sound of his own name, now synonymous with failure. I came to apologize. What I did was, there's no excuse. I was wrong. I was arrogant. I put everyone in danger because of my own stupid pride. I'm sorry." He finally ran out of words, the apology hanging in the silent room. Anya placed the circuit board down carefully, then looked up at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. There was no anger in her eyes, no triumph, only a calm, analytical assessment. "Your apology is a start, petty officer," she said, her voice even. But apologies don't fix faulty protocols. They don't recalibrate a flawed mindset. She picked up a small, complex-looking gear mechanism. You look at this, and you see a collection of parts. You don't understand how they work together, so you dismiss it as overly complicated. You prefer a hammer because it's simple, it's loud, and you understand what it does. She met his eyes again. People are the same. You need to learn to see the mechanism, not just the part. You have a responsibility to the men you train. Don't teach them to be hammers. Teach them to be craftsmen. That's how you make amends. She then went back to her work, the conversation clearly over. The dismissal was more profound than any punishment. It wasn't personal, it was professional. He had failed a standard. Later that day, another young female candidate, struggling with the complexities of a navigation exercise, was approached by Anya. Without a word, Anya pointed to the candidate's chart, then to a subtle feature on the horizon, then tapped the compass. She traced a line with her finger, offering a silent, elegant solution to the problem the candidate had been wrestling with for an hour. She gave a small nod of encouragement and walked away, leaving the young woman staring after her with a look of dawning understanding and immense gratitude. Anya's legacy wasn't in putting Rourke down, but in lifting others up, replacing loud ignorance with quiet competence, one lesson at a time. The makeshift Yagi antenna, the thing of driftwood and copper wire she had built on the Needle, was recovered. It was encased in a glass display and mounted on the wall in the main briefing room of the Naval Special Warfare Center. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque was installed. It didn't mention the storm or the rescue. It just said Valkyrie. Competence is a language of its own. 2 years passed. The story of the Valkyrie Tempest was now a mandatory part of the curriculum for all new instructor candidates at the training center. It was no longer just a piece of gossip. It had been codified into a formal lesson on leadership, bias, and operational assessment. The instructor who taught this particular module was a changed man. He was quieter, more thoughtful. His lectures were filled with personal anecdotes of failure and the hard-won lessons that came from it. He spoke of the danger of assumptions and the critical importance of recognizing diverse forms of strength. The instructor was former Petty Officer Rourke. After his reassignment, he had not washed out. Instead, he had done what Anya had advised. He had learned to be a craftsman. He had devoured manuals on psychology, leadership, and inter-service operations. He had volunteered for every joint training exercise he could, forcing himself to work with and learn from operators of every background and specialty. He had earned back a sliver of respect, not through noise, but through a newfound, humble diligence. He now used his own monumental failure as his primary teaching tool. He would stand before the new instructors, point to a slide showing a picture of Anya's simple, handmade antenna, and say this device was built by the most capable operator I have ever met. And I left her for dead because she didn't fit my stereotype of what a warrior looked like. Let my failure be your lesson. Look for the quiet professionals. Look for the problem solvers. The loudest person in the room is often the one with the most to prove and the least to offer. When things truly go sideways, the Sharma principle became unofficial doctrine. Assess, don't assume. It led to tangible changes. The screening process for special operations candidates was subtly modified to include more complex problem-solving scenarios, tests that rewarded methodical thinking and calm under pressure, not just physical prowess. The number of successful candidates from non-traditional backgrounds began to slowly but steadily increase, creating stronger, more adaptable teams. Anya Sharma herself was long gone, off to another classified assignment in some forgotten corner of the world, a quiet guardian doing her job without fanfare or recognition. But she had left something powerful behind. She had not just saved 16 men from a storm. She had altered the DNA of an institution, proving that the actions of one quiet professional could echo far beyond the battlefield, creating a legacy of wisdom that would save countless more lives in the years to come. True legacy is not a monument of stone or a name etched on a wall. It is not found in the thunder of cannons or the roar of a crowd. It is a quieter, more profound thing. It is the lesson that is passed from a humbled instructor to a new generation of leaders. It is the subtle shift in a culture, the breaking of a harmful stereotype, the opening of a door for someone who would have otherwise been dismissed. Anya Sharma's legacy was not just in the lives she saved that day on San Clemente. It was in the minds she changed. Her quiet competence was a force of nature more powerful than the hurricanes she conquered, a force that dismantled an edifice of prejudice brick by brick without ever raising its voice. She proved that respect is not something you can demand. It is something you command, often in complete silence. The greatest strength does not announce its presence. It waits patiently for the storm, and when the wind howls and the foundations of the world begin to shake, when all the loud voices have been silenced by fear and chaos, it gets to work. It builds, it solves, it connects, it leads. It becomes the calm at the center of the hurricane, the unwavering signal in the static, the quiet voice that guides others home. For more stories where competence triumphs over arrogance and where quiet professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.